Overwatch, one of my favorite games. 8 years of playing, 6 years of enjoyment, 2 years of solo tanking hell. Hey everyone, Axe here. I thought it'd be about time that I talk about the game's format. Start off, just for some information and a bit of background on myself. I've been playing Overwatch since release. In terms of playtime, I've actually picked it up quite a lot since Overwatch 2 came out, but that doesn't really mean that it's been enjoyable. And this really comes down to the game's format, or really more 5v5 itself, and how painful and aggravating it can be to play as a solo tank. And yeah, I know, I'm a part of the problem. I'm Amalgam Man. But look at it this way. I've been waiting for this character for 5 years. I wanted to play him since he was announced. He seemed really cool. But it turns out that this character, when he releases, just turns out to be one of the most insufferable designs in the whole game, just impossible to balance. And I love the character. I love Malka's personality. I just his kit is terrible. Though I will say I still like Cage Fight. It's a fun alt. But that's enough about me. Let's just immediately get into the meat and potatoes of the video. No dilly dallying. I think 5v5 has been very unhealthy for Overwatch and its popularity. While I think that 5v5 has been good for getting casual players interested in the game, it has been very bad for getting the competitive scene back on its feet and just making the game really enjoyable at a high level. And why is that? It mainly comes down to 5v5 itself as a format. And really, it's just because 5v5 isn't balanced. And it's not that it's hero balance, it's that it's unbalanced player count. You look at each role, you have two DPS, you have two support, and they have one tank. What does that mean for the tank? That means the tank, the lone tank player on the team, has to be able to match the power of two other players on the enemy team at all times. Otherwise, you end up having a super underpowered role. And when your game format essentially requires you to have an overpowered role, you end up having these beefy ass tanks that are just unkillable because they have to be in order to be viable. If you were to look at every meta in Overwatch 2's lifespan so far, you'd kind of notice that the tank has always been essentially the same thing. I sit around and do nothing but wait for my DPS to get a pick. And that's because that's just how it works. If you were to have Overwatch 1 level tanks in the game, they would just explode. They would just die instantly. So you have to have these tanks that have so much health and damage mitigation that they aren't killable, and since there's only one tank in active play, they have to match each other essentially at all times. Right? Because if you just let that infinite health tank go to your backline, the fight's just over. So you just have to mark them. And that means nothing can happen for you. You have no agency. And then it just all loops back to the format, like I said earlier. 5v5 causes this problem. You can't get away with the stuff you could as a tank originally in Overwatch 1 because you just get marked by the other infinite HP tank. And then you have characters like Malga and Roadhog that are just designed to counter tanks alone. And then you end up having the situation where if you don't play those characters, you just lose because the enemy tank will play them and you just die. And that's kind of the problem with the format. That's its inherent flaw. It is unbalanced in terms of player count, so it has to be unbalanced in terms of hero balance. And I really think it's about time Blizzard went back to the drawing board and analyzed if maybe they made a mistake. And I know with like me saying, oh, we should go back to 66, people are going to bring up the fact that 6v6 in Overwatch 1 sucked. And it wasn't the format itself, it was the hero balance. If you compare the hero balance in Overwatch 1 at the end of its life cycle to the hero balance of Overwatch 1 at the start of its life cycle, it was a vastly different game. It's just mainly the characters that had an infinite sustain, like Orisa, Sig, Brig, Bap. Those characters fundamentally broke the game and allowed you to essentially remove skill. You didn't need to be good at the game to play the game. Brig had just it was Brig. I don't even know where to start with that character. She had a 600 HP shield. She had 250 HP with armor. Her rally was even stronger. Her self heal wasn't like reduced by 50%. She had a 1 second stun on bash. It just that character was insane on release. And I know like, when 6v6 went into roll lock, she was a lot weaker, but she was still strong. She had essentially infinite uptime for no skill expression at all and still had most of those stats except for the shield health and slightly less self-healing. That's all that was different, really. And then you look at a character like Baptiste. He had like 5 health pools, man. He had like 400 effective HP because of Immortality Field and Regen Burst. It was very hard to kill that character. And combined with Brig, it was just impossible to kill them because they could just keep each other alive infinitely. And if you can't kill the backline, the only next thing you can do is try to kill the front line. But then you have a problem. Sig and Orisa. Look at those characters. Orisa just had one of the strongest brawling abilities in the game at the time with Fortify, reducing 50% of the damage she took. So if you were facing against something like Ryan Zarya, those characters can't deal headshots, so they can't really do anything about the damage mitigation. You just stood there and didn't die. And then you look at Sigma, where he's in the same camp. He has a really strong self-sustain ability with Kinetic Grasp, and then on top of that, he has one of the strongest shield abilities in the whole game. Of course you're going to have to play those characters. You have no choice. And what happens when you have no agency over what you play in a game? People stop playing. People didn't want to play Double Shield. It was boring as hell. And I was in that same boat. I stopped playing tank for a really long time because of Double Shield. I went on to just play Doomfist on alt accounts because he felt like a tank, but didn't have the same problem that tank had. But that's really what 6v6's problem was. It wasn't the lack of updates. It was more the poor balance. But that was probably what did the most damage to Overwatch 1 in general, and what affected queue times so much. And that's a big proponent of why they went to 5v5 in the first place. Queue times. If they had either nerfed the characters and just made them harder to play neutrally, and made the more fun characters like Reinhardt, Winston, Zarya, D.Va more fun and better, you would have probably seen queue times go up for tank, because people would have wanted to play those roles. That, and they could have still released characters. I mean, the whole resource management problem with Overwatch is a big, huge thing I don't want to get into in this video, but imagine if we had gotten, like, Ramatra in Overwatch 1. That character would have killed Double Shield overnight, because his whole thing was punching through shields and just being a nuisance. He is a very good answer for Double Shield comps. He would have killed Brig instantly, like, he would have just nuked her. But that's not what we got, unfortunately. What we have now is 5v5, and I don't think there's really a way to fix it. Look at Reinhardt, for example. His stats are decent. Like, I don't think Reinhardt is in a bad state, but the other characters in the tank role just overstat and overkit him. And it's just because of the format. They have to do that. Like, Reinhardt is stuck in an Overwatch 1 state where, you know, if he was an Overwatch 2 tank, he'd probably have 50% damage mitigation on charge. When his shield breaks, he runs 50% faster. He can use Fire Strike infinitely. Like, shit like that. Just because he'd have to be that strong. And even when Reinhardt is played, he just gets counterpicked. And that's the whole thing with tank. It's just counterpicking Michaels over and over because it's how you have to play the role. If you don't have the optimal character in a situation, you are going to lose. So if you're playing, say, Winston, and the enemy tank goes Roadhog, you either have the choice of playing a really hard matchup, or just going Malga and winning the game, unless they swap to, like, Sig, and then you have to go back to Winston. And then the cycle just continues. And there's nothing you can do about it. There isn't a second tank to cover your weaknesses in the tank role anymore. And in totality, it just makes the tank role unenjoyable. You have to force the mirror. If you play a weaker character, you're at a constant disadvantage no matter what. So you just force the mirror so that nobody's at a disadvantage. But when you're playing a tank mirror, you're doing the same thing over and over. You're just matching their tank. And there's nothing you can do to change that with the format. The 5v5 inherently causes this problem. And not only that, 5v5 leads to low agency for the other roles as well. It might not seem like it, but for the supports, you essentially just have to shove your gun in your tank's butt and hope they don't die instantly. And for DPS, you don't really have a choice but to shoot the enemy tank, because they're in the way, right? It's not like you can just avoid the enemy tank, because most of the tanks have such insane damage. If you neglect to, like, respect their fucking damage, they'll just blow you up instantly. Or, you know, you can just build your ult by, like, shooting a Roadhog for 40 seconds, and the Roadhog can't do anything about it because he just has to vape the whole time. And not only that, most of the DPS can just focus down the tank altogether, and then they just blow up because of the DPS passive. And that's another thing, too. All the passives, all the global health changes, all that shit. it makes the game so much harder to understand at a fundamental level. And it just makes the game more complicated unnecessarily. Like, oh, what is that little arrow in the bottom left of your screen going to mean to you if you're a bronze 5 tank player? Absolutely fuck all. You have no idea what that means. All that you know is that you die faster when you get shot at by an enemy DPS player, but even then, you won't die because you're probably just playing Orisa, so it doesn't matter. That arrow means absolutely nothing. But in high ranks, if you get shot at by a DPS, you just explode, because they all know how to focus the tank and just make your day miserable. And then with the tank passive, creating all this knockback resistance and ult charge negation, why? What's the point? It makes high skill output, like getting a good Lucio boop, less valuable. Imagine you hit the Li Zhang rollout, and the only person that's there is like their Malga, and you just used Overrun. You'll boop him, and it's like a fart. He doesn't move at all. That's not fun. That's not interactive. What it does is it makes the game more one-dimensional. You have only one way to play the game, and it's shoot the tank. Because you can't do anything else. What are you going to do? Go on a duel? No, you can't. The tank's going to kill you. So, it's just... It's going to keep perpetuating the same cycle of the tank can't die, but I get my ult if I shoot the tank. So I shoot the tank. Right? It's not fun. It isn't a good gameplay loop. The only way we can really achieve a good, fun gameplay loop for Overwatch again is by reevaluating our position. What made the game fun? It wasn't, oh, immortality abilities and, you know, tanks that had 50% damage mitigation. It was those fun plays where you could go Tracer and one clip the entire enemy team's backline, or go Winston and you could primal their tanks off the map, right? It wasn't just all this boring stuff. But then again, what if we go back to 66 and everyone's concerned that, oh, we're going to have a double shield meta come back again? For one, we can't even. There's just no tanks except Sigma and Ram that have shields that are remotely close to Orisa, and it wouldn't be the same. Like, yeah, you could have double shield with Ram and Sig, but the problem is Ram's cycle is too inconsistent to have, like, actual good value in double shield, and that would just kill it. That would just make double shield hard to play. But then people be like, oh, but Bat Brig, like, you know, boring poke comps. Nerf Brig. Nerf Bap. Those characters don't need to be as strong as they currently are. They are very powerful for basically no reason at all. It's very frustrating for people to not, like, understand that changing the 66 is really just numbers tweaking. It's not reworking a bunch of characters. All the characters as they stand right now would actually pretty much just fit right into 6v6, just with a few number tweaks. All the tanks take their 175 HP away, like take 200, 175, something like that, bring them all down to like 500, 400 HP. Some characters would need a bit more drastic adjustments. I do think that characters like Malga, specifically with Cardiac Overdrive, that should not affect his teammates. If it was in 6v6 in that state, it would be genuinely, like, even stronger. So, just remove the effect for his teammates. Make it so, like, Overrun doesn't, like, give you a damage reduction anymore, because what's the point? You don't need it. And there you go. Like, that would fix the character. Now, there'll always be those edge cases and shit that, you know, they don't account for. People be like, oh, but what about this character or that character? It doesn't matter. We've already had to rework half the character roster already for 5v5 to even be playable at all. At this point, we just should take our losses and go back to 6v6 and just modify these characters to be viable there. Because half these reworks, they can just... The abilities still exist in the game. You could just slot the abilities back into the characters. That was made apparent by the fact that Rissa's Pole just got added back, and Hanzo's Scatter Arrow just got added back with this creator patch. It wouldn't be that hard. People act like it's some monumental task. No, it's you change the number and there you go. You have another tank again. A part of the problem why Blizzard doesn't want to address 6v6 is that they don't want to admit they're wrong. At least that's what I think, personally. Because as an aspiring game dev myself, if I were wrong about something, I would go back and see what I did wrong. But they are very adamant about not wanting to change their viewpoint and just sticking with 5v5 no matter what, not willing to look at the drawing board. Anytime there's like a streamer interview, something like that, all these like interviews I've watched, there's specific rules of like don't talk about 66. Why? Why aren't we talking about it? I think it's healthy. Even if we aren't going to go back to it, we could still learn what made 66 fun. Oh, hey, it was the dynamic tank gameplay. Oh, yeah, we can try to do that again. But no, we're just going to completely ignore the topic altogether and just end up with this almost like, it just feels like a toxic environment with these devs. We can't talk about a certain thing. We're shushed. And it's really frustrating because as a player, I want the game to succeed, right? I love this game. I want to play it competitively. And I miss 6v6. I miss the experience of having a teammate that can protect me and keep me alive while I keep the rest of the team alive, you know? And I really miss that because I think that's really what made Overwatch unique. And we're kind of dumbed down now. I think right now, as it stands, Overwatch is in a fairly okay state balance-wise, but not for tank. Overwatch will never be enjoyable for tanks in this format. It sucks. I hope someday they'll reevaluate their position. I really want to hold on to hope that they will. But if they come out and say that 5v5 is going to stay, you won't expect me much longer to be playing this game. Anyways, that's pretty much all I have time for. I really appreciate you for coming by and watching this video. Took a lot of work, took a lot of retries over and over. That's my first time making a long form video like this, but I really appreciate it. I guess I'll just let the rest of this game play out, and you all have a good night. Appreciate it.